Okay, thank you. Thanks very much for inviting me down. I did know about this society when I was living in London, and I did know about your meetings. I always wanted to speak to a group like this for different reasons. Hopefully we'll touch on some of that today. So when Bernard actually suggested the idea, I was actually quite intrigued, and I think I was quite challenged, and I checked through the website, and it's an area that I'm aware of, and I'm aware of cybernetics and the way people do research in cybernetics, mostly because of the RC51 in sociology and so on. Now, before I start, the most important thing to remember really about this is that there are probably as many Luhmanns as there are people who've read Luhmann. So you're not going to get what I would consider to be an authoritative view on Luhmann. I'm someone who reads Luhmann, and this is kind of the way I take Luhmann and the bits that I think are quite important for people who are certainly in sociology. And I struggle with Luhmann still, and I find some of it very difficult. So I'm still in the learning process. I have a particular interest in Luhmann, which I'll come to towards the end, hopefully. And the other thing is that I've only accessed Luhmann in English. I'm hopeless at languages. I'm hopeless at English. So I've had to wait. Probably over the last 8 years, I've been reading Luhmann as more and more work has emerged in English. And more commentators have written on Luhmann who are also German-speaking, who can actually talk about aspects of his work. So you must remember that one of the things about my perspective on Luhmann is from an English-speaking author. And so that's a limited view. And there will be inaccuracies and there will be problems with some of the things that I'll say. I like to hope that I can stay quite close to some of the parts of Luhmann, the key pieces for me. But invariably I'm still learning, and I'm learning quite slowly because the stuff doesn't get translated that fast. But that said, this last 3 years has been excellent. There's lots of really good material out in English now on Luhmann, and there are plenty of sources that you can go to. Luhmann really, at a glance, he was prolific. He wrote 15,000 papers in his academic life, 15,000 pages in his academic life, which was 1 page for every day he was in work, apparently. Which, I mean, if I could do even half of that, I think the head of department would be delighted. Basically, he was taught by Tulka Parsons initially, and we'll come to Tulka Parsons in a minute, but he was always interested in grand theory, hence why he went to speak to Tulka Parsons, with a huge theory of society. So he always wanted to work in grand theory. In the German tradition in sociology, they talk a lot, big theory, big society, large theories that account for different aspects of society. Before I really get going, are there any sociologists here? Right. Where are you studying? Where are you teaching? Brunel. And you know Luhmann? Yes? Oh, really? Okay. Interesting. That's good. So you can keep me right. That's very good. Essentially, I mean, I have to say, he really had some quite major debates. He follows on from a functionalist legacy. He had some really interesting academic, quite involved debates with Habermas, who's the leading critical theorist in sociology, and who's kind of the more recent sort of version of the Frankfurt School. Some people would say Habermas has actually, left the Frankfurt School now and has moved really away from that school of thinking. But Luhmann and Habermas had one of those debates that you get very rarely in academia, and they disagreed on practically everything. And so that in a sense is even just reading back through that and getting any of that you can get in the literature. It's interesting just from the perspective of a fairly young academic. Luhmann objected to the idealism in Habermas. He was kind of very dispassionate. He didn't like Habermas's sort of critical sort of view of things. Habermas kind of thought that any time we communicate, we are pushing toward, well, he used the ideal of communication to adopt a stance to be able to critique society. And Luhmann didn't think that that was very productive, and the two of them got into all sorts of debates, sorts of interesting discussions. And Luhmann is also well known for his debates with the German left, and also for his public writings on ecological communication, in particular about the green movement and so on in Europe. So really, what we're looking at is someone who is highly critical of traditional sociology. He is essentially one of the probably few sociologists, and there are others around, like the structuralist Frankfurt School and so on. But Luhmann rejects the notion that people are important to society or are central to society. For Luhmann, the dynamics of society lie beyond the person. And of course, that's sacrilege to most sociologists. If you go to a sociology class and you tell them that people might not be that important for the dynamics of society, they get really upset. And they can throw some heavy words around in a meeting. He rejects the hierarchical model of society. In other words, he rejects any notion of society that has people at the center or at the base of society. And that kind of rejection for an idea that still remains a part of very much modernist thinking in sociology, that is quite a harsh thing to do, and a lot of sociologists have quite a lot of problems coming to terms with his rejection of what we consider to be the Enlightenment thinking, that man is really central, is important. As a result, really, because he felt that sociology really wasn't getting to grips with society, it didn't really understand it because it was tied to this notion of man, rational man and Enlightenment man. He started looking elsewhere for other concepts. And so as a result, he digs in. You find him looking into cybernetic theory. He starts looking at Boolean logic. And he starts looking at theoretical biology to get other concepts. So it's very much an interdisciplinary view. He went into systems thinking in general and looked around for concepts that could help him build a different sort of concept of society. Basically what I want to do is just take you very quickly through background to Luhmann. I'm going to give you some basic concepts. I'm going to try and keep it basic because my understanding is basic and I don't want to get too confusing for me. I want to give you a little bit of an outline of some of the analytical strategies that you can use in sociology associated with Luhmann. And I want to sort of show you some of the work that we've been looking at or that we're currently developing in Sheffield. But as I say, the last section is going to be really brief. Basically, if you were going to get a decent background of Luhmann, and there are loads of other concepts that I just can't cover in the sort of time that we have available tonight, I would say that these are some of the key concepts when it comes to considering Luhmann. We've got functionalism, complexity, autopoiesis, form, distinction, semantics, and communication. And they kind of flow from each other in the way that I've put them together tonight. There are other concepts that are equally very important or central to his theory, but these are the ones for me that get across the essential sort of flavour of Luhmann. As I said before, Luhmann was essentially a functionalist, or he comes from functionalist thinking. He was taught by Parsons. I don't know if you know much about Parsons' view of society. Which?
I just said a lot of words.
A lot of words. Yeah. Okay, right. Parsons had essentially what we call a structuralist functionalist view. And that's quite straightforward. What it says is that society is like an organism. It's like a body. And in order for the body of society to survive, it has to have organs performing certain functions. And so the overall structure of society survives as a result of the orderly performance of functions in order to keep that society going. Is that okay? So that's structuralist functionalism. In other words, there are structures, there is a body, and the body needs certain things to be performed in order for that thing to survive, to exist. Therefore, in Parsons, society is an integrated whole. Society works together and it's cohesive. And this is what we call the organic view of society. This is essentially what we talk about. And we talk about society in Parsons is essentially based on a collectivity of individuals acting, coordinating each other's actions together, cooperatively almost. And that's in a very simplistic sort of interpretation of Parsons. Is that okay? Basically? No?
I really only did. I haven't followed sociology courses on my psychology degree. I can do that perfectly well. So yes, it's fine.
Is that okay? Yeah? Okay.
Give us quick examples of differentiation of functions.
Well, before I do that, the best thing to do is to describe what happens when people get sick in Parsons' theory. Parsons had this notion that essentially people are orientated towards achievement in order for society to function properly, to function smoothly. Everyone buys into the norm of achievement orientation, right? We want to achieve, we want to get somewhere in society. Now, in order to do that, in order to buy into that sort of achievement orientation, whenever you get ill or whenever you become ill, you are unable to really function. You're not able to keep doing the things to settle into the roles that you've been assigned in society or that you ascribe to in society. And so in order to recover, the society generates an area, a space that you can enter. So we call this sickness. And what happens is that you start to be unable to function, you're not able to achieve, to perform the roles that you want to. And in order for you to become sick, you have to seek help. You have to go to a doctor. So becoming sick is achievement, a positive achievement in Parsons' model. Okay, so what you do is you consult a doctor. You are obligated then to get better as quickly as possible, and you're obligated to submit to the scrutiny of medical professionals. On the other side of it, there is the doctor, and the doctor, because of his role, is given access to privileged information, and there are a whole series of rights and obligations on both sides of this relationship. And society has developed this thing called the role of the sick role. And people enter that positively and stay in it for a short space of time. And the idea is, as soon as they're well and able to take on their main social role again, they then leave that social role. And they return to society. Now, the thing about that sick role is that it's focused on the cohesiveness of society, maintaining social cohesion. On the other side of the sick role is a second model. And Parsons drew very heavily on Freud and psychoanalytic theory at the time, and he said that on the other side of the sick role there is actually a possibility that people may want to, or not may want to, but through their actions they can make themselves ill, and that they can achieve illness in a negative way. And that's quite kind of against the whole notion of society being basically cohesive and so on. So the problems in Parsons' theory very quickly become structure maintenance, the maintenance of social structure, the maintenance of social roles, or structural breakdown. And you've got this huge edifice of an organism, a theory that is based around this performing organism of society, that is generally inflexible. Structures don't change very often. Structures are there because society as a whole needs them. So roles like the sick role are there because they perform a function for society. In other words, they're functionally dependent. So society isn't really flexible. It doesn't change very much. What you get are breakdowns in role functions, and what you get is structure maintenance. So roles perform maintenance or breakdown for functions. And very simplistically, Parsons' theory was heavily criticized for not being able to account for social change. It's a very rigid framework. The other problems with it is it's action-centered, so it has the person again. Persons are quite important in Parsons' kind of functionalist theory of society because of its dependence on action. So Luhmann, he's been taught by Parsons, and he sort of comes out of the Parsonian functionalism, and he essentially reverses the whole notion of structural functionalism, and he says no. He says what we'll have functional structuralism. And what that means is not just a play on words. And a lot of secondary readers in Luhmann actually miss the point. But essentially, for Luhmann, if functions have to be maintained, structures will be found to maintain those functions. Now, that will seem pretty unclear, but what it simply means is that if there is an important function that needs to be performed, various structures will emerge, not just the one structure, not just the one kind of pattern, and those will emerge and they will help maintain that particular function for society. And there's nothing necessary about functions. There's no overarching logic, there's no organism of society there. Functions just emerge, and they need to be maintained for whatever reason. If they're no longer necessary, they disappear. And so there isn't any overarching logic in the sense of Parsons, where you have an organism that needs to be sort of maintained in some way. Luhmann's quite adamant that it's kind of almost chaotic, almost. In fact, as far as Luhmann's concerned, it's amazing it isn't more chaotic than it is. And what he finds amazing is that there is social order at all. So he reverses the whole Parsons sort of framework, and he says what we have is the potential for entropy, the potential for chaos, and what we get, for some reason, somehow, is order. Now, how does that happen? And that becomes the purpose of his theory. Part of what he says is that basically there will be structural dynamics. And so society isn't really essentially a whole in its own right, but what we'll have is structures that can change. Let's say that you have one function that isn't maintained very well by a particular structure. Another one will be found. Something else will be substituted that will allow that function to be performed. So in other words, Luhmann's theory becomes focused on constant contingent shifting changes in the particular structures of society. And his whole theory then needs to explain in some way how those structures are constantly changing. So, one function, and you get structural equivalence. So let's give you a good example. Take the legal system. The legal system protects norms. It protects what is normal or considered to be a counterfactual norm almost. So it protects how you ought to behave and what is considered to be the right way to behave under certain circumstances. Now, it might seem, in a naive sociological view, that the courts are the legal system. But in fact, and Luhmann was, of course, a lawyer and coming as a legal sociologist primarily, he said, well, actually, what we have is a series of structures to help maintain that function. Not just the one structure, as in Parsons, a very sort of structural notion of society. What we have is we have the law, we have codified law, we have case law, and we could even have religious law, all there as different structures to maintain different social norms and to protect social norms. And so in Luhmann, if you look at Luhmann, and if you look at our current social, if you look at British society recently, we have had a recent move where the disability rights has been the new disability legislation. That legislation is essentially a form of codified law. And it has only come into being after 20 to 50 years of changes in case law. So case law is very flexible. The structure of case law changes quite quickly. It keeps up with social norms, because this is the whole point. Social norms are always changing. They're always being modified and changed. So what we have is, we've got one form of codification of law that adjusts quite quickly to the changes in social norms. And that is case law. But of course that's not enough. We need something that also fastens and fixes social norms at certain key points. And so if you look at the disability rights, there have been changes. A lot of the case law had actually challenged and modified aspects of society. Things were getting quite messy in British society. And after a period of 20 to 30 years, there's an overhaul, and they try to fix it. And so you get a codified system of law. But all basically structures to perform the function of protections of norms. But you've got more than one structure that's allowed to do that. So Luhmann already is more flexible. He's allowing for it. Sorry?
Would it be right to take the grand scale things like abolition of slavery to be under that same...
Oh yes, he would. He would have said that. Yeah, he would have said that. And in fact, part of a Luhmannian analysis would be to go back historically and look for the changes in the structures that lead to different aspects, basically different structures that are maintaining the norm around slavery. So in fact, yes, he would do that. But he wouldn't expect just one. And a lot of sociology is quite naive in the conventional view of sociology. They kind of don't allow for this kind of flexibility in theoretical...
Well, there's an ethical issue which gets a bit tiresome there, I think. Mm-hmm. There's an ethical issue because from our point of view it looks so unthinkable. Yet, presumably by this model, it's all embraced.
Yeah. Essentially what he's doing is he's allowing for contingency, he's allowing for flexibility. He's building complete flexibility into his theoretical scheme. He doesn't want to get caught the way Parsons did in terms of his structural functionalism. And so the point is that with Luhmann, you have a theorist who is attempting to allow for contingency, allow for change. And that brings us to the overarching kind of, where Parsons had the structure of the organism of society, Luhmann's overarching code is complexity. Luhmann says that the environment is highly complex, and that in order for a system to survive, it must reduce that complexity in some way. That's one of his overarching codes. Now, the only way to reduce complexity, and some people have claimed it, some people are highly critical of this, he says that in order to decrease complexity, you have to increase your own internal complexity. In other words, you have to talk about your environment, and that leads to an increase in your own complexity, your own accounting sort of system of your environment. Now, the way I've just stated it is personalized, but in Luhmann he says systems, not people, systems, in order to account for a complex, polycontextual, highly complex environment, in order to make that environment meaningful, they must change it by reducing complexity. But in order to reduce complexity, they are changing their own internal environment, their own internal codification of the environment. Yes, Bernard?
I think what you touched on here, the silence issues, we're all familiar with what's Ashby's law of variety. And this is a species of that.
It is, yeah.
Restating, using Ashby's law, basically.
He is, essentially. That's where he's taking.
About models.
Sorry?
In our tradition, you go on to talk about models at this stage.
Okay, that's interesting.
How they use them.
Okay. Well, Yeah.
The internal complexity doesn't.
Sorry?
The internal complexity should match the environment exactly, otherwise it would destroy the
That's right.
system in question.
Exactly.
Manage it, but if it completely becomes the same, then it's take it to the
That's right. But and also with Luhmann, you get, if with the increase in internal complexity, you'll get a feed back into the environment. The environment then becomes more complex again, and you get a kind of circular causality but it's not direct exchange. It occurs through, and this is one of the slightly vaguer terms in Luhmann, but it's not through a direct exchange with the environment, but through basically through an energetically open kind of relationship in some ways. So there's no, he does allow for thermodynamics. He talks about flow of energy, but he doesn't talk about, it's not matter in the sense that that we would understand it. He's trying to get away from that. He's talking about information and meaning. So yeah, you're right, absolutely. If the system's complexity matched that of the environment, there would be no need for a boundary, and the system would vanish, essentially. So and that doesn't happen. Sorry?
Organisational closure, is that helpful?
Yes. Yeah, that's the term he uses.
You
Exactly. Oh,
right.
absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just around the corner. Yes, I mean, the environment is always generating variety, but the system can survive in that environment. It always have to generate the variety to manage that variety.
That's right. Okay. Right. So, basically, what we're getting is what we're talking about then is multiple systems, and we'll get to the nature of the system in a little while. But essentially, multiple systems, multi-centered, many centers of different systemic activity occurring, differentiating out, separating into around the performance of particular tasks that just happened to have emerged that needed to be solved or sorted in some way. And so we get what Lars Cookthorpe has recently called the polycontextual society. You get this many-centered society, a differentiated society, not one that's based on the organic person at the center. We have a society that's organized around many different systems. And the nature of those systems we come more towards in a couple of slides. Yep, go ahead.
Also, Guns has introduced the term polycontextual in cybernetics. Lars is quoting Guns.
So is Lars, that's where he's taking it from, is it? Oh, that's interesting.
And those days, every system basically is constructed, so it gives you its own context to it. Every system has its own view of the world.
Yeah.
So there's no one world, is it?
But you see,
yeah.
we talk about this in socio-cybernetics, and it's like I said before, we don't teach a master's in this. There's no library where you can get all of this material together. It's actually very difficult to locate a lot of this kind of reading, and this kind of thing would be quite helpful for people like me who are trying to find the broader theoretical context. I find it very difficult to access a lot of this. So.
Is Paul, Cybernetics is Paul from University College Dublin? Paul Stokes?
No, I don't know.
Okay.
Okay, so.
What we didn't explain earlier is that within the International Sociological Association, which is a big sociology thing, there are a number of research groups or research visits, and there's one on socio-cybernetics with about membership of 150 people, and Barry and I met through that. Yes.
I think Stokes is a member of that.
He may well be. I mean, there are people interested in systems and side approaches to understand society. There are all the purposes around Luhmann or something around.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
No, it's an excellent group. If I didn't have that group, I think it would have been a lot harder for me, especially not really being able to access German. So this is just a summary. Complexity becomes the guiding principle of society, and complexity sort of management, maintenance, and so on. And that's essentially just a summary of what I've just said. Okay, so when we get to the type of system that we're talking about, Luhmann eventually, I think it's around about the 1980s, takes what they consider to be the autopoietic turn. And essentially, now I have got this slightly wrong, but autopoietic systems, you know about autopoietic systems?
Yes.
You do? I don't need to go into detail on this then, do I? Just go over what Luhmann did with this. Do you know autopoietic? You'll know autopoietic. Do you know autopoietic?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, so that's easy. That's quite straightforward.
The roots of the concept in deciding solution on self-organizing systems.
Yeah.
And the concept of organization closed systems are
Great.
using themselves as a system.
Excellent. So I can skip through this quite quickly.
It's very nice to see you mention autopoiesis there, because I find people don't use that.
Well, in fact, I've got it wrong there, because in fact a car factory is a heteropoietic system.
Oh, I beg your pardon.
Because, and that's according to Mingers. Now, Mingers gets Luhmann wrong on autopoiesis for some reason. And I don't know why. I think it's because he considers Luhmann's version, and I'll point out the subtle difference that others have picked up on in the literature since. But I think that Mingers is writing at a very early time, and he's writing, and he still has a concept of matter in the notion of autopoiesis. So he's taken Maturana and Varela, where it's very much matter-based. It's kind of, the organism, with flows of things. Yes?
Maturana starts out generalizing this notion of autopoiesis and general model systems. And later years, when he's pushed on it, and people actually ask him, can you apply the concept of autopoiesis to social systems? He says, I'm a biologist. I apply to molecular biological systems. And he goes and retreats in this kind of conservative.
Yes.
A lot of people follow this.
We get a big debate in our group over this.
So, very much we're only supposed to use autopoiesis to refer to biological systems.
Yeah, that's right.
People like that say, well, the basic idea is that there's an organisational closure. So let's just do an organisational closure system, whether they're biological, psychological, social, whatever.
Yeah.
But Luhmann says autopoietic, meaning organisation.
I also find that, and I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but the distinction between organisation and structure here to me is not actually. This is quite problematic for me. On this slide, I was reading it today and I thought, I don't know about this.
It's very simple. When it says actual components, actual relation.
Yeah.
Think of that as a time slice.
Right.
At any one time slice, there is a particular structure. The whole point is that through time, as the structure changes, the organisation is maintained.
Yeah.
So the concept is the organisation.
So we're back to basically a ship with boards being replaced kind of concept. Isn't that right?
Yeah.
Okay. But it's kind of a very old notion of structure, as far as I know. In social science, that's considered to be I would consider that quite problematic, actually.
You're saying organisation produces structure. Is that right, Simon? Or is it the other way around? I can never.
Well, it's almost chicken in that sense. The main idea is that the organisation is, as it flows through time, is reproducing itself. So if you want to look at the structure, you're looking at...
That's the kinematic picture.
Exactly. It's a kinematic versus kinetic.
Yeah.
It's just sociology especially, is that Luhmann obviously accepts some kind of functionalism.
It's interesting.
And they do distinguish their approach from, they're trying to apply to society really, and yet with the thesis and cognition, they talk about society with quite a number of ultra left, very connected to the ultra left, actually, part of the whole idea that they just apply back. So they do stray into
But surely the whole notion of autopoiesis serving the idea of autonomy, which is what they do, is functional.
Yeah, well, it fits.
It's certainly functional. I find.
It has sociological value.
It's interesting.
Marshall never gets to the point of saying that there are social systems as such. He talks about networks of coordinations amongst organisms as well. So you've got an account of culture, and not of societal system.
Okay. No. I'm seeing what I can skip because I know now that these guys are fairly up on this stuff. Okay, so Luhmann, right? He gets hold of this concept and he changes it, like he does with everything. And this is the thing about Luhmann that makes him very difficult. And a lot of people get frustrated with him because he changes stuff. Bernd, for example, gets really upset because he takes it and he Luhmannizes everything. So Luhmann Luhmannizes it. Well, this is it. You'll have seen this. There's no point dwelling on it, but that's Maturana and Varela's definition. But essentially, we go on to Luhmann and autopoiesis, and he changes the idea from self-organization to self-reference. And he drops, and this is the bit that Mingers, I think, didn't get from his reading. And that's unfortunate because the book was extremely expensive and the chapters on Luhmann are not, they're a bit difficult now for me to use. But essentially, the idea is that he drops any idea of matter and energy in the sense of a biological organism, and he moves it to self-reference. It becomes, autopoiesis is pure self-reference. And that is quite a profound shift for me, because he's essentially moving it away from the idea of an organism to the idea of communications. He's moving into the realm, and he says autopoiesis is about communications and how communications are organized, essentially. All right? Sorry?
Answer. I mean, the term of peace is taken up by the cybernetics who study autonomy. This is in place of question time, okay? So, in place of autonomy. So, we find in an orthopedic system that we're taken up really by these people to talk of pathological autopoiesis, which would describe cancer. So that the idea of the selfish consumption, like just so that we can produce ourselves as an organisation, we are familiar with, and we find it is a deep pathological to society. We understand it. Life expectancy can decrease in case of we'll go on anyway. But yes, okay. I'll I think better anyway.
Okay, so essentially what he's doing is he's saying that basically, and we've talked about functional equivalence, but it's back to the whole notion. A business, for example, can operate with either a hierarchical structure, or it can work with a team-based structure. There'll be secondary characteristics of that business that will change, but essentially the organization of the structure of the business is secondary to the self-reference of the business, and then he talks a little bit, and he talks about information closure, operational closure, but he says that systems, communication systems, or autopoietic communicative systems, are energetically open. And some sociologists think that's a bit vague.
Again, this is how to read the translate back in terms of we might understand. There's the energetically open in the sense that there's all that stuff going on that people running around in the sunshine. But what he wants to focus on is that which is the social system, that you just pointed out, is a system of communication. The messaging that's going on around it.
Yeah.
And so he's gone away from the material basis of society, all that energetics.
Yeah.
He's focusing on all the communication.
That's right. That's right.
Which roughly now is how one might say we've got brain doing all the energy stuff, and our thoughts on the messages. So it's cognitive-wise, and there's a bit of an analogy. It's communication is what he talks about.
Yeah. Okay.
Us talk about conceptualization. Not that different.
I find there's a good book by Anderson that talks about and compares different sociological fields. So you've got like Koselleck's concepts and Laclos, Foucault, and so on. And it's an excellent book on methodology, and I've drawn on some of it to get across what Luhmann is doing. But this is Luhmann sort of referring to autopoiesis, and he does it in a lot of different places. And I probably could have picked a better quote somewhere else. But everything that is used as a unit by the system is produced by the system itself. This applies to elements, processes, boundaries, and other structures, and last but not least to the unity of the system itself. Autopoietic systems then are sovereign with respect to the constitution of identities and differences. They, of course, do not create a material world of their own. They assume other levels of reality, as for example, human life presupposes temperature in which water is liquid. So essentially, Luhmann is interested in autopoietic social systems. He's interested in sort of looking and studying, or looking at he brings the concept of autopoiesis to try and extend his analysis of functional differentiation, functional structural differentiation. And these are the different systems. So the book Social Systems has this diagram in it, and I've inserted Parsons just because if I didn't put it in, the diagram all jumped off to one side, so I shoved Parsons in there just to get the balance right. But essentially, Luhmann's book is he outlines the different types of system, these different types of autopoietic system, and he studies, essentially, the book is on social systems. It's a general sort of account of what a theory of social systems would look like. And then he writes that, and that becomes one of his most important pieces that he's written. Okay, so moving on, and this will be stuff that you'll know as well. Part of how autopoietic systems operate is through this whole concept of form. And you'll know this is Spencer Brown, and essentially, of course, influenced by von Forster and Gunther as well. And essentially, we know that observation refers to something, and when you designate something, you're copying something in. The other side of the distinction doesn't need to be specified as such. So a distinction essentially contains an inner side and an outer side. And Luhmann follows very much what Spencer Brown's saying. Now, he doesn't follow the calculus, he's just using the concept of distinction and reference for his purposes. For Luhmann, these are not binary. Distinctions are asymmetrical, so quite often social systems operate using one side of a distinction. They can be strategic in that sense. There's a lot of sociology around binary codes, good, evil, and a lot of stuff looking at the deconstruction of binary codes in more recent sociology. Luhmann isn't like that. He doesn't talk about a simple symmetrical binary schematism. He says social systems operate on one side of a distinction usually, and they're very strategic. They're looking to designate one side over another. And so, for example, something cannot be simultaneously beautiful and ugly, right? As soon as you observe something as simultaneously beautiful and ugly, you can't do that. In order to see something as ugly, you have to move to the other side of the distinction. That takes time, and it changes the thing that you're studying. So for Luhmann, the form is designation. In order to reduce complexity, we have to designate something. And in designating something, you have to leave everything else out. Okay? Now, basically, we have essentially first-order observations. And first-order observations are where we designate one side of the form. And you choose to call something something. And essentially, every observation for Luhmann, following Spencer Brown, has a blind spot. So essentially, what is to be designated on the other side? If you're involved, engaged in action, if a system is engaged in communication, it can only designate one side. It quite often misses the other side. In other words, it has a blind spot. And Luhmann was very interested, as a sociologist, he saw himself as operating really at this second order level. What he was looking to do was to see quite often what was on the other side of what a social system was designating. Because following from Derrida, following from the post-structuralist sort of critique of concepts, Luhmann very much followed that line. And he said what happens is that as soon as you designate a side of a form, the other side comes as a parasite. You can't avoid that happening. And as a sociologist, what he was interested in was mapping the blind spots of society. And so quite often his systems theory looks for social blind spots. And therefore, what does society make? What he's interested in is how do systems of society make something the topic of conversation and leave the other thing out, or leave the other side of the distinction or the form out. And of course, as a sociologist, up at the second order level, he admits that sociology doesn't have any special significance because it itself is also first order observation. You cannot claim, you cannot escape the blind spots, so that someone could come along and observe the sociologist observing the social system, and they would see the blind spots of the sociologist, the things that the sociologist could not see. And so Luhmann's sociology is very much about looking to see how one side of a distinction is played over another, and also trying to discover what is on the other side, because quite often what is on the other side of a distinction is not actually that clear. It's not completely arbitrary, because as soon as you call something, you've reduced the complexity, and your communications are heading in a particular direction, or the system's communications are already going down a particular route. And that actually feeds into, he follows Shannon's notion of information, that the selection of one thing over another is a corresponding drop in contingency. There is only so much else that can be on the other side of the distinctions of the various systems.
Is it possible to give an example?
I'm going to give some examples. So basically, Luhmann's social systems theory, best to give an example at this stage, when society uses the term risk to communicate, often what it is designating on the main inside of the form, risk itself as a concept is a form of time binding. It's a way of binding the future to the present, a decision that's taken in the present. So what risk does is it designates what risk is one side of the distinction, and on the other side is danger. And Luhmann says that the inside risk communications, when we speak of risk, we speak of decisions. And he's quite happy to be accused of decisionism in this respect. And he said, what we do is the system decides to do something, and that is considered to be a risk. Now that decision could be subject to danger. But where does the danger come from? The danger comes from the thing that the system can't see. It comes from the environment. So if you're thinking back to the distinction between system and environment, a system says, let's take a decision to, an organization, a company says, let's take a decision to invest in gold. There's always a danger that the price of gold could plummet because of some particular, maybe oil goes up or another viable option for investment appears in the environment. So that what essentially happens is that the company decides that to take the risk. It's all about how to take a decision facing the future in the present. So it solves the problem of time. On the other side is essentially there are dangers. There are things you can't control. And the system is, the blind spot of the system is what it can't see. What it can't see are dangers as such. And of course, one person's risk is someone else's danger. So every system can see different risks and different dangers. So when we talk or look at risk communications, Luhmann in particular was very interested in the semantics of risk communication. He analysed how risk and danger were deployed in various different systems. Is that all right? No? So the indication is risk, and the distinction is the distinction between risk and danger. Now, for Luhmann, there are three ways to draw a distinction. You can have a distinction which the inside is designated only, so that is an object. So where one indication is made, you only have an object. Where the other side is designated, you have a concept. Quite often hot and cold, but the other side doesn't always have to be the opposite. And then we have a very important thing in Luhmann, and we've got second order constructs, and these are extremely important for social systems. So, for example, and this is the most common example that you get, you can have the construct or the distinction, the concept of government and opposition. Okay? But if it's to be second order, the government can also see within itself opposition and government. So the government can refer back on itself, and you know that within governments there are those who do take the decisions and those who don't. So that even within a government there is opposition and the government. And that's what we consider, that's what is often described as a second order construct, where the government can see itself within itself, but it can also see its own opposition within itself. Yeah? And those second order constructs are the ones that become extremely important for functional autopoietic systems, for the autopoietic systems of society, for observation systems. Okay, so basically what you're getting is the re-entry from the perspective of Spencer Brown. So the government re-enters and looks at itself. It sees itself in itself, but it also sees its own opposition within itself. So, for instance, you look at government today. The Labour government 3 years ago were looking at the system of changing the tube system, privatisation. And so what it did was the Labour government or the Labour Party developed one group of people within itself to look at privatisation as an option. They developed another group to research maintaining the public sector as an option. And so they had the government and opposition within itself, and that's using a second order construct to actually observe the complexities and the possibilities for the tube system. And eventually they decided that actually privatisation is the way that they would go. But through using the distinction, the second order distinction, the operation and the organisation of the party decides how it will proceed with either privatisation or not.
You get that with the opposition.
Hmm? Yes. Yeah. You get it in opposition too. But the point is that you would reverse the order. So the opposition would be on the inside. So the Conservative Party could be undergoing the same thing. If it was in government, what would it do? If it's in opposition, what's it supposed to say? Now the problem's slightly different, but the second order construct's the same.
I was thinking in terms of the opposition actually voting with the government.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
That went through the government got its way, whereas the Conservatives voted against the government supporters, if you like.
Yeah.
Who were against Parliament.
Yeah, but that's what you get in politics. So you get this play of opposition, government opposition. Who's governing and who isn't? Who is in opposition? And the second order construct is the ability for the system to observe oneself as either government or opposition, and how you do. So very useful second-order sort of construct that Luhmann has sort of demonstrated in social systems. And basically, that takes us to the whole concept of semantics. As we said previously, meaning makes the world accessible. Essentially, basically, world society is not really a system. It's not a system in the true sense. Meaning helps bring what is out in the environment of various systems and to make it subject of communication. Meaning essentially enables communication to occur. It enables the selectivity of systems. And the meaning itself is based on the distinction between what is actual and what is potential. So in other words, all that exists in the world could become the subject of communication. It could be potentially the subject of the way in which we talk, or the way in which society communicates with itself. Meaning is the difference between that potentiality, and what is actually designated. So the fact that we decide to select one thing over everything else is meaning, and it comes into being momentarily and it dissolves, because as soon as you make a designation, the meaning of the designation slowly slips away. Now, meaning allows communications to build up on top of each other, and it allows the connectivity of communications. So what becomes meaningful, and this is the influence of Husserl on Luhmann, what becomes meaningful becomes real. It emerges at that time and it becomes real at that point in time. And it's a very phenomenological concept of meaning that he draws on. Now, basically, semantics is characterized by the recording or fixed sets of repeatable forms of communication. Semantics are where you get a whirlpool of meaning, and different forms and repeatable forms of communication condensate around particular distinctions. And so you might get the semantics of love. What is love? You know, in the past, love operated according to courtly love. The problem of love in modern society has become the problem of interpenetration, how to achieve a greater interpenetration with the other. And so love has become a problem of interpenetration, and you get a lot of the communications around love in society condensate around the essential repeatable forms of communication, around the distinction between looking at how much of the other is copied into oneself. So when you love oneself, or when you love someone, you're supposed to copy so much of that person into, take account of so much of what that person is, and in order to, the degree of love that you feel is the ability to which you're able to copy in as much of that person into who you are, into your being. And the condensation or the semantics of love has condensated around that essential designation. Now, the whole notion of meaning is different for psychic and social systems. Meaning is essentially momentary and fleeting, and semantics makes meanings available. Now, psychic systems operate in terms of meaning. So do social systems, and this is how the two couple and relate to each other. But psychic systems connect meaning in consciousness, which is not directly observable. Social systems, and only social systems, can communicate, and they connect meaning through communication, through a series of linked communications. And essentially, the fact that psychic systems can't communicate is really his anti-humanism coming through to the fore again. He's really pushing forward his whole notion of communication.
This is where I just find...
Yeah,
it's good. My major critique of Luhmann is the ability of notions of psychic system on a person, and in contrast to loads and loads of philosophers in social psychology, development psychology, and not least of the past, there are other people who socialise the person. So to be conscious is to be a social process, and to be conscious is to be communicating if only with yourself. So the human person is a social construct of a system of communications.
Yeah.
It's a microcosm of society. So the Luhmann distinction doesn't hold.
It's very unfortunate that Luhmann didn't do any research, and that all he did was theorize, because Luhmann was concerned with social systems only. And therefore, the criticism is only a criticism in the sense that, and it only holds for me in the sense that he just didn't focus on it. It doesn't mean that he couldn't have. And in fact, it doesn't mean that there isn't room to enable some sort of connectivity between persons, or some kind of opening up of Luhmann to the traditional kind of empirical analyses that we see in sociology. So I agree with you. It's very unfortunate, and many people would say that if you were going to look for that side of Luhmann, then you should read Husserl, because he remained faithful to Husserl, as far as I know, right up to the end. But like I said, once more, it's a different, I mean, he was essentially a phenomenologist on that side of things.
Yeah, I don't see how
Yeah.
just give you this kind of the subject view of the world. It's like whereas it's not looking at how an individual is constituted as a social being. This is what other people like Piaget and Dostoevsky.
Right.
It relates, it was certainly Parsons
Habermas does that.
Habermas, yeah.
In theory of communicative action, yeah, absolutely.
So, but my feeling is that having made that critique, you want to sort of go with what Luhmann has to say about social systems. But bearing in mind that there's this bit of a novel there.
I think there's a weakness. I agree with you. I think this particular thing is where most sociologists get really, really annoyed. They get very upset when he says people can't communicate. It's kind of like really, they just get really annoyed. And he talks a little bit about coordinated, and his concept of communication, which is also important for this group, I think, is composed of a tripartite distinction between information, utterance, and understanding. So every time there is communication, there will be information, that is a selection from something, of one thing, a designation of something, as opposed to a range of other possibilities. There will be an utterance, that is how the information is actually presented, and then there will be an understanding, that is what is to be understood by the communication. Now, what is to be understood, and this is where Luhmann differs on profoundly from the group in hermeneutics and sociology. What is to be understood is by no means determined by the psychic system. People cannot read each other's minds in Luhmann's perspective.
Could you just clarify this psychic system you've spoken? I mean, this is the private internal individual, which is hard to talk about, but not impossible.
Yes.
Not very good at it.
No, he says that it is difficult to talk about, but it becomes the subject of communications in society. So, for example, the legal system will construct a person, the type of person that it requires. The medical system, like for example in a legal system, it would be not really primarily important to know whether someone had a liver or not. So the system, the psychic system the psychic system in the legal system, generally speaking, wouldn't have livers, arms and legs, unless the arm and leg actually featured in the legal case.
The man on the Clapham omnibus.
Right.
Is often used in the legal context.
Right.
Being an everyman.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Juries are not supposed to be expert.
Yeah.
But that's what we're told.
Yeah. And likewise, the medical system the psychic system within the medical system will have particular characteristics. Yeah, absolutely.
Doctor.
And so, for example, I've been looking at codification of quality of life communications, and what you find is that apart from the emergence of the semantics of quality of life, which is post-war concept, but the semantics of quality of life have enabled a kind of a circulation of a condensation of meaning around the distinction, basically of whether or not, life, not life. But essentially, if you look at the medical system's codification of quality of life, and just skipping ahead and trying to avoid getting into huge detail on it, medical system has a highly differentiated view of what quality of life is. So, for example, if you go into a liver clinic, you'll find that the subject of the liver clinic doesn't have eyesight. Liver function doesn't necessarily relate to your eyes and how you see. But if you go to the dental clinic, you'll find that the subject of the dentist has teeth. So the medical system is highly differentiated and a highly specific concept of quality of life that is differentiated according to the function of each independent part of the system. And so that's partly what we're doing, is looking at how the particular codification of quality of life is differentiated, but nonetheless organized according to a core kind of problem.
And proposing a psychic ideal of some kind.
It's composing it's composing its subject. The system is composing the subject that it is most concerned with. So, for example, if you use a generic quality of life measure and you try to find out whether or not your treatment for the liver is working, or the treatment for, say, the teeth is working, if you use an overall quality of life measure for that, it doesn't show anything. In other words, the fact that you're contributing to life isn't there. And so you need to get a subject-specific measure. You have to get a measure that that is composed of the components of the person that relate to teeth in everyday life.
Stopped, doctor, and I can run again. I mean, there are measures of quality of life, aren't there?
Oh, there are, but what I'm saying is they're highly specific to the system, to the subsystem of medicine that they are related to. So, for example, you don't find in dentistry that we use generic quality of life measures because they don't show any treatment effect. They're useless for what that part of the system is trying to measure.
Curiously enough, I have no teeth at the moment. People find them a really thing. I can't eat steak, so I hope in 3 or 4 weeks when I get my teeth back into everything, I'll be able to eat steak again. Now that surely...
That wouldn't be in a generic quality of life measure, but it would be in one of the oral health-related quality of life measures.
Well, but this is the point. I mean, this is a very interesting question because the quality about health outcomes and so forth is a burning issue, I think.
Yeah.
In view of the huge expansion, so on, of interest in the delay.
That's right.
Issues, fantastic issues in medical, which are not widely appreciated, even by doctors resisting, for example,
that's right,
recognizing their own personal error rates. Fantastic.
That's right.
You say to a doctor, hey, look, this is really horse racing. He doesn't want to know.
Yeah.
You ask a nurse, what's the false positive rate of this test? Oh, it's 100%. We do it all the time. She doesn't know her job. That test, you're lucky, is 95% accurate.
That's right. Yeah.
So we know that.
Yeah.
Maybe our doctor knows that. We're not sure.
Yeah.
So the measurement of health outcomes very interesting. Big question.
Yeah.
And I'm not clear. And you're saying I'm not clear how to tackle it.
That affects...
If I can eat steak, I feel like I'm
for example, doing sort of parade acts of surgeries each on the line.
Yeah.
And the patients might be better if they're allowed to die and dignity or whatever.
Yeah.
That sort of
area. That's right.
The surgeon is concentrating on the actions of the various organs in the body, keeping them alive.
Right. If we go back to this, quality of life.
We've got life expectancy.
That's right.
That's pretty objective. It's all very well coming along and saying, oh, a life in pain is not a life worth living, or the rest of it. Okay, yes, some of us want to go. But the majority of people, if they live longer, will live better lives. I mean,
right.
Something
I presented a paper on this last summer, and I'm still working on it. Quality of life is a second-order construct.
Yeah.
And it's based on the distinction between how much life, or the life of life. Life is a totalizing reference. It's a reference to everything.
Who is this QLY thing, the quality?
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's slightly different. That's a quality of life, quality of adjusted life here.
Yeah.
That's slightly different.
Yeah.
But the whole set of this semantics is based on the contribution of is the life of life. How much life is there in life? It's life's own contingency. And it all emerges around about the time that they were deploying high technology to the fixing of the human organism. What they discovered was that they could keep a body alive after you've gone. So essentially, they can keep your body going, but you won't be there. So what do you do with the body when the owner's not there? I mean, it's a real problem. And so they've started to confront that technology had gone so far that it could do these things to the body. They could transplant hearts, livers, lungs. They could do all sorts, chemotherapy. They could plug you up to a machine for dialysis. You'd be left plugged to the machine. But would that give you a good life? Plugged to a machine, having to go every day for dialysis. And so they started asking the question, how much life is there in life? Are we contributing to the life of life? And so second order construct, quality of life, very quickly becomes a second order construct. And you're right. And this is where Luhmann says, this is partly why Luhmann is very useful. So there's something about the function of asking about the life of life.
Yeah, but when you already suggested a solution when you discussed autonomy. I mean, you've got another slide or two.
Yeah.
Do you want to do those?
Okay. Well, essentially, we've moved on. I mean, there's loads of analytical strategies that you can use for Luhmann, and I can forward the reference. There's a brilliant reference that goes through different types of things that you can do. So you can do a form analysis. What's the unity of a distinction? And what paradox does it establish? You could look at how systems become fixed around boundaries of meaning. You can look at how autopoiesis is defined. You can go on, you can look at how systems are differentiated. And this is all taken from the Anderson book. It's a very, very good book. You can do semantic analysis and media analysis. So there's different strategies we can use with Luhmann. I just want to get on because I want to get finished, really. I mean, just applying Luhmann, you've got to bear in mind he's anti-humanist. You've got to keep that spirit of that kind of anti-humanist sort of slant, or you begin to slip away from a Luhmannian approach. And there have been big critiques of Luhmann from Habermas, who says it's essentially a metabiology. He's lifting Maturin and Varela. It's yet another metabiology. Now, what are we interested in? Well, essentially, we're kind of just interested. I'm interested in linking Luhmann through interactions. 80% of sociology is on interactions today. So to build a theory that doesn't include interactions in any great way leaves yourself completely. This is my big gripe with Luhmann. Is he's built this theory that's totally dissociated from sociology in the main. I mean, the vast majority of people, certainly in the UK, there are very, very few people who know anything about Luhmann. And he will become more important. But it's making it really difficult for people to accept that he has anything worthwhile to say if most of his theory is here. So abstract that he's got a bit here, and there's actually quite a bit here, but not every sociologist is interested in organisation. The vast majority are interested in interactions, sadly. But at the same time, well, it is. The discipline could do a bit more, I think. So the problem that I have is how do we bridge this gap? And what we've been trying to do is look at a way of actually just saying, look, Luhmann can say stuff about what we would consider to be a very traditional sort of place for humanist kind of, very humanist-based sociology. Habermasian sort of approach has been applied in extensive ways to doctor-patient interactions, very successfully asking Habermasian questions about doctor-patient encounters. And Luhmann, kind of lost a lot of ground because he doesn't appear to be applicable. Well, I actually think he's very applicable. So what have we been doing? Well, we've been observing dental encounters, and we're interested essentially on looking at the interactive system and how it is interpenetrating with clinical systems. And this is going to be hypothetical. It's an inductive type of research. So what we've done is Olga, and this is essentially Olga's work. She's a PhD, a Russian PhD student who's been with me. She's in her second year, and she's just collecting the data, and we're working, literally tomorrow morning we'll be sitting writing and trying to clarify a lot of these concepts. So what have we done? Well, essentially, she's got transcripts of people coming to see the dentist, and we're gonna just run through it as though we were trying to deploy a new methodology based on Luhmann's social systems approach. So we're going to specify domains. There'll be domains for the psychic system called the dentist, the psychic system called the patient, and then we're allowing a little bit of space in case there happens to be a nurse or a student present as well. Right, so here's basically what was said. Hello, mister, come on in and have a seat. So we get basically a designation of an object. The seat appears in the encounter. There you go, get into the hot seat. And the patient and dentist, they laugh a bit. Sorry we kept you waiting. So we're getting these designations, right? They're just simple designations from a Luhmannian perspective. They don't really say very much. There's very little else happening. All right? Were you here when the fire bell was going off? We were outside. And the patient goes, no. Right? Now, as we go on, no, we cannot hear. And then it goes on. We've got a letter from your dentist, mister. And the patient goes, yea. And he says you're getting blood blisters in your mouth. Yea. Is that right? I have no clear idea why they're happening. Have you got any, and we can't hear this. The patient goes, no. When did you start to get them? So when, start, after the operation, and the dentist goes, I had an operation in the mouth. Dentist goes, right, what was the operation? Okay? And essentially, they're asking. Now, what we're suggesting is that in this exchange, you're getting a two-sided distinction now and then. Right? Now, if I was to flip back about 5 slides, I would call this, at this point in time, we would call this a concept. Now, what we're saying is there could be, this is supposed to be time, but basically what we're doing is we're breaking down the distinctions or the indications, and we're looking for double-ended. We're looking for concepts, and we're looking for second-order constructs, in which we will then attribute to the clinical system. And what we're going to say is, and what we claim in the thesis, is that these, over a period of say 20 to 30 different encounters, we'll have a battery of common distinctions, common second-order concepts that are used in dental encounters. And what we're going to do is, we could say, now and then is a concept of the concept of before and after. In other words, time. And in every encounter, so far, we have found that time becomes an important theme for communication. So, you know, for example, my daughter was ill at the weekend, and so, you know, she had a high temperature. So I took her to the emergency doctor. We'd given her Calpol about 3 hours previously. We took her in and she was fine. There was nothing wrong with her at all. You know, no temperature. Doctor looks, can't see anything. Look, see is a second-order construct. That's another one that we're finding. So the organisation of the clinic operates according to second-order constructs, first and second-order constructs, and it solves certain problems. That's what we're going to say. So Luhmann can actually be used to sit and look at interactions, and nobody says that these are directly communicating with each other. They could be just communicating with each other's view of each other, which is essentially what Luhmann would say. And what we're going to say is that the clinical system, as an autopoietic organisation, operates by solving certain problems. And one of the problems is time. How do we have symptoms present in the present if they're not really there? And as this interaction goes on, the dentist doesn't believe the person, says that it's not a problem. And what you get is this, what Habermas would consider to be, in Mischler's sort of term, is the system invading the life work. Well, Luhmann wouldn't say that. Luhmann would say that they're just using their own self-reference. That essentially, when as it goes on, you can see. All right? So these blisters, like you said, they're full in blood. Yeah, they can be quite big. It's not really sure, right? That's the dentist responding. Right, now we've got this in a huge taxonomy, a big long sheet, so she's kind of trying to open this up. I actually have a lot, let's see, that's how I have a picture of it before, if you want to have a look. Have you got it yet? So the picture on the camera. So I took this picture inside the mouth of the blister. Yeah, that was, I mean, by the time again, I felt it like it took absolutely ages to go away. No, it seemed they tend to be short-lived, and by the time you see them, they cannot. Basically, this is how it used to be. It used to be. I had one. They came around, and it was touching my tongue, and it was beating. It was pulsated. This is the patient speaking. That was nothing there. I got in the car, or I pushed it up. I got in the car, drove off, and then I could feel it like tickling or tingling. And I thought it is coming this one around. And it did, straight back, and I couldn't believe it. So I pushed it up with the tongue, and it came back down again as they were driving away. And that's the dentist. It was very swollen, said the patient. All right, is it this one? See, it's very small. Sometimes it could be this big. That's quite. And the patient goes, this time it was that one. Small, the dentist says. So the dentist, throughout the encounter, gets this thing. It's a small thing. It's not a problem. And the patient is a big problem. They bring, they're trying to cross time with the symptoms. So he brings a picture to solve the problem of time. The temporal appearance of symptoms is a big problem for clinics. So I brought my daughter into the doctor at the weekend. We'd given her Calpol. The temperature dropped. There was bugger all wrong with her. She was running about in the waiting room. 2 hours later, she's at home. The temperature's soaring. She's sweating and crying with a sore head. Part of the organisation of the clinic is to solve the now and then of symptomatology, is what we're going to suggest. You see? So Luhmann can be used quite easily to actually look at interactive dynamics in clinical systems. And that's the kind of thing that we're looking to do, really, at the moment. So, I mean, really, just to go on well over, I think, for me, this is the big thing at the moment. What we'd like to do is connect Luhmann to interactions, because this is the way we're going to get mainstream sociologists interested in Luhmann, is to bring them in gently. A bit like you guys tonight. And then we would like to bring him to traditional sociology, and we'd actually like to show how his scheme kind of works. Now, if I go back, this, I suspect, could be modelled quantitatively, but I just lack the ability. I know that people are kind of, looking at dentist-patient encounters and timing everything, but I have a feeling that once we get this right, if we can get the model right and get the sort of the identification of different distinctions proper, that we might be able to look at some sort of quantitative kind of modelling approach to clinical encounters. But that's just trying to show how actually it can be applied quite easily. So I don't know what you make of that. It's difficult. It's hard to do in 1 hour, I have to tell you. We need 3. Olga's not particularly Rona. In Mischler's terms, this is life world ignored as this encounter continues. But Luhmann would just say, well, they're just referring to themselves. They're referring to their own view. And what the clinic's doing is it's just helping solve a series of problems. One is the temporal dimension. The clinic helps solve. Another one is look, see. The second order distinction is that the dentist will look and see, or look and say. And so this whole notion of observing, the body in clinics, in medical encounters and so on is quite a big thing. But, like I said, we literally only just started the analysis, and this is the kind of thing that we're looking to do.
Have you discussed CT with Barry?
Not directly. I've been referring to asking general
Yes.
sense of the theory of psychology, or the psychology of visualization. The dynamics of communicative interaction that you're looking at here. I was thinking of language work in family therapy, and the Parsons too, which is about accepting the perceptions. In that sense, Luhmann is kind of secondary to some primary sources on the view that we're never going to communicate with others, but we're going to communicate with our model of it.
Yeah.
So it's
But you can clearly see it in this. You can see that happening. As this goes on, you can see that the two of them are just like talking.
Bert and I worked with Gordon Task, who have the conversation theory, which, arguably is a conversation, but
it's quite close.
And the theory in there somewhere, so
if
you want to test. Later on, he went to, as Professor of Andragogy, I thought we were talking about sociology, and as Prof of Andragogy, he produced interaction of actors theory, which the actors are actually supporting eternal processes. Now this forces you as a sociologist to think more deeply than Luhmann has, because what we're saying here is that this stuff may be transformed, the wood may rot, your carbon molecules may turn into something else, but as you've probably heard, every time you breathe in a few molecules that probably made up Julius Caesar and so on and so forth. Only a few, but they are there. So what we're saying is that these eternal processes are supporting, let's call it a sociological process, an interaction, a conversation.
Yeah.
And, well, that's the basis, the part of the basis. So it's pretty universal, and it needn't actually relate to interactions or anything with people.
Yeah.
So you could have buses colliding, or you could just have the pot boiling on the stove and the froth coming over the edge as being something you can analyse as an interaction. Now the question is, we were both burdened early in our lives with a very deep definition of the word concept as a procedure for bringing about relation. Now that actually relates to physical dynamics in which the execution of concept in any medium, not just the brain on this table, produces a new relation. And so we see that in interacting, we're producing new relations all the time. Okay?
Yeah.
That's the model Bernard and I have worked with.
That's quite similar to Luhmann, though.
Well,
Absolutely.
It's a model concept of dynamics. It's distinction making and breaking. It's dynamic. Interestingly, what Pass does also, because we work in education, we're interested in the idea of someone learning from another. And again, you can't transmit to the other. The other has to model you, and then feed back to you sufficient evidence that they've modelled you correctly. So you now understand what I was saying. And in that sense, it becomes quite problematic in the sense of giving you a normative model for effective communication.
Yeah.
So, we understand each other, if we can teach back to each other satisfactorily, etc., etc. It ends up being an agreement with established that you understand each other. So there are ways in which you could read the identification thing and say, well, actually, maybe both dentists and patients can be educated a bit more on how to communicate with each other effectively. Not least by raising the awareness that they're engaged in these secondary communications.
Protection of useful interaction, protection of applicable relations, or the blood blisters, taking the tooth out, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm jumping ahead of it, I'm not quite sure. So I'm assuming I know what you're talking about, I'm not knowing if I'm perhaps there.
No, I think we're just quite literally doing it now. And Olga's kind of struggling with, trying to, for example, this is kind of really this is a concept that's occurred in this empirical sort of case, but the general sort of condensated form would be before and after. You see what I mean? We're still working on how to specify the rules to designate what this is and how it emerges from, basically, because they are solving the problem of time.
You call this form analysis?
Yes.
Okay.
This is form analysis.
There are various forms of discourse analysis and latent semantic analysis. I mean, there are lots of positive research methodologies who try to get at what is the meaning in this text or what was happening in the encounter. And this is very much more classical in the sense that it looks at what are the sets of underlying distinctions which are governing the discourse. What is the kind of polycontext in terms of each person having
Yeah.
bouncing off each other.
But that sounds right. At least we're not interested in timing, pauses and stuff. We're not interested in that. We're interested in the designation. We're looking at indications, distinctions. That's primarily what we want. So it's slightly different to what a lot of people are doing, with Mishler and so on.
And self-referentially, we are in a similar situation at the moment.
Yeah, that's right.
Making noises at each
And
other.
it gets even more complicated when Olga goes and interviews both afterwards. Then it gets really tricky. What's she doing? She asked me that, and I says, well, we filled in the ethics form, so we had to go and talk to them after. Yeah, exactly. Give me a break. I'll figure that one out over the weekend.
While we're on the subject of time-limited conversations, I suppose we ought to think about where we might stop. One on the basis that we ought to at least buy you a beer or something, and the other on the basis we lose the room at 9. So would this be a reasonable point at which to stop and move on for anybody who wants to continue the conversation across the road?
Yeah. I've got to be at the train station.